He tore up my competition photos, said I photoshopped my face onto a real lifter's body, then curled my cancer-ravaged frame like I was a toy. When I finally opened up about my records, he smirked and said, "Tell that to the scale, skeleton." I just stared at him. That was 5 months ago. Yesterday, he watched my comeback meet in silence and clapped through tears when I hit 500. I'd lost 70 pounds during chemotherapy, and even after 6 months of training alone in my garage, I still looked like a skeleton compared to my former self. When I finally worked up the courage to walk into Iron Paradise for a real workout, my arms looked like pencils sticking out of my baggy tank top. What the muscled regulars didn't know was that before the cancer, I'd squatted 800 pounds and held world records in 3 different weight classes. Back then, I'd learned not to judge someone's strength based on their appearance. It looked like the guys here hadn't learned that lesson. The biggest guy there, who everyone called Tank, watched me set up at the squat rack with just the empty barbell for my warm-up and immediately came over. "Little man, this is a serious gym for serious lifters," he said while looking me up and down with disgust. "The Planet Fitness is 2 blocks down where they give you free pizza and won't judge you for wasting everyone's time." When I explained I always started with the bar to warm up properly, he laughed so hard he had to wipe tears from his eyes. My chest tightened, but I kept my mouth shut because I'd promised my therapist I'd avoid confrontation while rebuilding my confidence. The cancer had taken enough from me, and I wasn't going to let some gym bro take away my first day back in a real weight room. His workout partner Brad started filming me, mocking how slowly and precisely I moved through each rep. "Look at this guy treating 45 pounds like it's a max attempt," he narrated loudly. Probably the most weight he's ever handled in his pathetic life. The whole gym could hear him commenting on how my visible ribs meant I'd never touched a weight before. I gritted my teeth and continued my set, focusing on my breathing the way I'd done during chemo when the nausea got overwhelming. Tank moved directly behind me as I added 1 plate per side, close enough that I could feel his breath on my neck. "Watch this, everyone," he announced. "This is where fake lifters get exposed." He reached out and poked my exposed spine through my shirt mid-squat, making me wobble slightly as people laughed. "I can count every bone in his back. This kid's built like a xylophone." The poke threw off my balance and I had to fight to complete the rep, my face burning as I racked the weight. I wanted to tell him I'd squatted his body weight for warm-ups before the cancer, but I knew they'd just mock me harder for lying. Tank's girlfriend wandered over and gasped when she saw me up close. "Oh my god, are you okay? Like medically?" she asked with fake concern. Tank grabbed my arm and lifted it, showing everyone how his fingers could wrap completely around my bicep with room to spare. "Feel this," he told her. "It's like grabbing a chicken bone. This is what happens when gamers try to become athletes." My stomach churned as more people gathered to watch, but I moved to the bench press anyway, still trying to complete my workout. Brad spotted my gym bag and grabbed it, dumping everything onto the floor. My old competition photos scattered across the rubber mats, pictures from when I weighed 220 pounds of solid muscle. Tank picked one up and burst out laughing. "This skeletal loser actually brought fake pictures as inspiration," he announced, holding up a photo of me deadlifting 700 pounds at nationals. "Look, he photoshopped his face onto a real powerlifter's body. That's the saddest thing I've ever seen." He started tearing them up while I stood frozen, watching 3 years of competitive memories turned into confetti. Brad called the manager over, claiming I was making other members uncomfortable with my concentration camp physique and suggesting I needed medical clearance. Tank added that I was a safety hazard who might collapse and create a liability issue. "Plus, it's bad for business," he said. "New members see this walking skeleton and think our supplements don't work." They brought over the gym scale and Tank literally picked me up and placed me on it like a child, announcing 132 pounds of pure weakness to everyone. His girlfriend said her purse weighed more, and to prove it, Tank grabbed me under my arms and did bicep curls with my entire body while counting reps out loud. Each lift made my ribs ache where the surgical scars were still tender, but I couldn't break free without looking even more pathetic. Tank ripped my shirt off to compare physiques in the mirror, exposing my surgical scars and protruding ribs to everyone. "This is what happens when you skip every day," he said, flexing next to my skeletal frame. He probably tells girls he's into fitness. Like anyone would believe this concentration camp survivor could lift anything heavier than his iPhone. I was setting up for my working sets, trying to block out their laughter and focus on why I was there, when Tank decided to attempt a massive bench press for his audience. He loaded 5 plates per side while calling everyone to watch. Brad spotted him as he pressed it once successfully, but on the second rep, I heard the distinctive pop of a joint giving out. The bar tilted violently, Brad lost his grip, and nearly 500 pounds of iron plummeted toward Tank's throat. 20 years of muscle memory overrode every weakened fiber in my body as I dove forward and caught the bar inches from his windpipe, my hands finding the exact grip width that gave me maximum leverage as I redirected the weight to the safeties with the same technique that had earned me my records. Tank's eyes bulged as he gasped for air, while Brad stood frozen, his phone clattering to the floor as he whispered, "There's no way someone your size just did that." My arms burned like fire, holding that bar steady while Tank's face went from purple to white, his eyes rolling back as Elena sprinted across the gym screaming for someone to call 911. The entire weight room stood frozen, watching my skeletal frame control 500 pounds of iron that should have crushed Tank's windpipe, Brad dropping to his knees beside the bench with his mouth hanging open. I pushed the bar carefully toward the safeties, feeling every tendon in my shoulders screaming as the metal finally clanged into place and Tank sucked in a desperate gasp of air. His massive body convulsed on the bench while Ashley rushed over shrieking that I must have grabbed the bar wrong on purpose to hurt him. Brad's shock turned to rage as he stood up and shoved me hard with both hands, sending my 132-pound body flying backward into the dumbbell rack. The metal edge caught my ribs right where my biggest surgical scar was, and I felt the skin tear open as warm blood started soaking through my torn shirt. Elena immediately jumped between us, yelling at Brad to back the hell off while pulling out her phone to call paramedics, but Tank managed to push himself up on one elbow, pointing at me with a shaking finger. He wheezed out that I grabbed the bar wrong and could have killed him, already twisting what happened even though I'd just saved his life. The other gym members started whispering and pulling out their phones, some having recorded the whole thing from different angles. 20 minutes later, I sat on a bench in the corner pressing a gym towel against my bleeding scar while paramedics loaded Tank onto a stretcher, his right shoulder hanging at a weird angle that meant it was definitely dislocated and probably torn. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, but it wasn't from the weight I'd just lifted. It was the adrenaline crash mixing with that familiar feeling of my body failing me just like during chemo. My phone buzzed with a text from Tommy asking how my first day back at the gym was going, and I almost laughed at the timing. Elena walked over with a clipboard full of incident report forms, her face completely unreadable as she asked me to write down exactly what happened. She said she needed my membership information too, then paused before adding that Tank had been a member here for 8 years, and his family basically sponsored all their competitions. The way she said it made it clear I was the outsider who'd just hurt their golden boy, no matter what actually happened. I drove myself to the emergency room to get my reopened scar checked, walking into the waiting room to find Tank's whole crew already there. Ashley immediately started recording me with her phone, narrating loudly about the sick skeleton who attacked Tank at the gym and probably did it out of jealousy. Brad stood up aggressively and took a step toward me before a security guard moved between us and told him to sit back down. Dr. Patel appeared in the doorway looking confused, since I wasn't due for a follow-up for another month. Then his eyes went to the blood on my shirt and the haunted look I probably had. I explained everything while he carefully examined the reopened incision, shaking his head when I told him about Tank using my body for bicep curls earlier. While Dr. Patel stitched my scar, a police officer walked in saying Tank's girlfriend had filed an assault complaint, claiming I deliberately interfered with his lift to cause the accident. I showed him the videos on my phone of Tank picking me up and curling my entire body, but he said that was a separate matter and he still needed my statement. Tank's parents burst through the ER doors demanding to see the man who attacked their son, his father's face red with anger, as he threatened to sue me for everything I had. He shouted that his son had a torn rotator cuff and possible nerve damage, that his competitive career might be over because of me. The irony that Tank had destroyed my competition photos just hours earlier while calling them fake wasn't lost on me, but I kept my mouth shut. The next morning I woke up to my phone buzzing non-stop with notifications. Someone had posted a video titled "Skeleton Causes Accident at Iron Paradise" that already had thousands of views. I wonder what Tank's real story is here. Someone that aggressive usually has their own issues they're dealing with. The way he immediately targeted the weakest looking person in the gym makes me curious about what he's trying to prove to himself. The comments were brutal, calling me a jealous weakling and an attempted murderer, with only a few people pointing out that it looked like I'd actually caught the weight. My anxiety spiked seeing my emaciated body on display for the whole internet to mock, the surgical scars visible in the shaky footage. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and started digging into Tank's competition history, finding forum posts from 3 years ago about suspicious muscle gains between meets. His Instagram showed massive size increases in just 4 months, with commenters asking what stack he was running. I found a bodybuilding forum thread where someone claimed Tank got kicked out of a tested federation for refusing a drug test. The injury he blamed on me, a torn rotator cuff from a failed lift, matched exactly what happens when juiced muscles outgrow tendon strength. 3 days later, I was loading groceries into my car when Tank appeared behind me, his right arm still in a black sling. He shoved me hard against my door with his good arm, pressing his forearm across my chest. "Drop the countersuit," he said, then spit directly in my face before walking away, while 2 families pretended not to see. My hands shook as I wiped his spit off my cheek and drove home, where I found an email from someone named Victor. He'd attached 20 video files from my competition days, including the 800-pound squat that earned my first world record. Victor's message said he kept everything from my lifting career, and these people needed to learn who they attacked. The videos showed me at 220 pounds of muscle, moving weights that Tank could never touch even with his chemical help. I watched myself deadlift 700 pounds at Nationals, the same lift Tank had torn up in the photo. 2 weeks after the incident, my friend Tommy came over with a ring light and phone tripod from Amazon. He set them up in my garage gym corner, adjusting angles while I loaded the barbell with just 135. "Show them who you really are," he said before leaving me to film my first workout video. The bar felt heavy on my skinny shoulders, but my form stayed perfect, every rep hitting depth with the technique that took years to master. I uploaded it without captions, just me squatting weight that would have been my warm-up 3 years ago. That evening, Elena from the gym texted me screenshots of 5 different complaint forms about Tank harassing new members over 2 years. Each complaint got buried after Tank's family made another donation to buy new equipment or sponsor a competition. She couldn't officially help, but thought my lawyer might find them useful for showing a pattern of behavior. The next morning, a certified letter arrived from Tank's attorney demanding I stop spreading defamatory claims about the incident. The legal threats felt familiar, like chemo drugs poisoning everything while hoping the good parts survived longer. I spent hours on powerlifting forums discovering Tank had been messaging my old competitors, asking them to say I was unstable during meets. Most ignored him, but 2 guys who never beat my records agreed to give statements about my supposed aggressive behavior. 3 weeks after the incident, Dr. Patel asked me to meet him at a coffee shop near the hospital. He looked uncomfortable as he explained Tank's lawyers hired a medical expert to testify about my compromised physical state. "They want to argue cancer patients shouldn't be in gyms without medical supervision," he said quietly. The discrimination made my stomach turn worse than any chemo nausea I'd experienced during treatment. Back in my garage, I loaded 185 on the bar for my next video, still pathetic compared to my old strength. Each rep went deep while I thought about the thousands of hours I'd spent perfecting this movement before cancer stole my size. In the video description, I wrote that strength wasn't just the weight on the bar, but showing up when everyone said you're too weak. Meanwhile, Ashley started a GoFundMe for Tank's medical bills with a story about how a jealous wannabe destroyed her boyfriend's dreams. The page raised $10,000 in 48 hours, while I struggled to pay my legal aid attorney's filing fees. The fitness community rallied around Tank's sob story, while my side stayed buried under viral video comments calling me dangerous. My phone buzzed at 2 in the morning with Brad's name lighting up the screen. His texts came in fast, full of spelling mistakes and drunk guilt about what they'd done to me. He sent me a video file that took forever to download on my crappy internet. The footage showed Tank and Ashley at the gym entrance an hour before I'd arrived, watching me through the window as I warmed up in the parking lot. Ashley pointed at my skinny arms while Tank made a throat-cutting gesture and said something that made everyone around them laugh. Brad's next message said they'd planned the whole thing after seeing me outside, deciding to make an example of the skeleton who dared enter their gym. More messages flooded in about how sorry he was, how he never meant for it to go that far, how Tank made him film everything. By morning when I woke up and checked again, every single message had been deleted, and Brad wouldn't answer my calls. 3 days later at my cancer support group in the hospital basement, I told everyone what had happened at the gym. The woman next to me who'd just finished her own chemo grabbed my hand so hard it hurt. Another survivor named Carol, who worked as a paralegal, started taking notes on her legal pad, her jaw getting tighter with every detail I shared. She explained that using someone's cancer against them violated the Americans with Disabilities Act and offered to research case law for free. The whole group spent the next hour sharing their own stories of discrimination and planning ways to help me fight back. My old powerlifting coach called that afternoon saying he'd reached out to every judge who'd ever seen me compete. Within a week, 7 different judges had written sworn statements about my technique and character. Judge Morrison, who'd been there when I set my world record, wrote that I was the most technically precise lifter he'd seen in 30 years. Another judge sent videos from my competitions showing my perfect form under maximum load. Coach mailed me a thick folder of these testimonies, each one describing the athlete I used to be before cancer turned me into a skeleton. The papers felt heavier than any barbell I'd lifted lately. 4 weeks after the incident, my friend Elena, who still went to Iron, texted me that Tank was back. She sent me a video of him walking through the gym doors with his arm still in a sling, stopping at the entrance to give a speech. He talked about overcoming adversity and not letting jealous haters bring down real athletes. The whole gym clapped as he walked to the bench press where I'd saved his life, now calling it the spot where weakness tried to destroy strength. Elena's video showed him posing for photos with members while pointing at the bench and shaking his head like he was remembering some terrible injustice. That night in my garage gym, something inside me finally snapped. I grabbed a 45-pound plate and threw it against the concrete wall hard enough to crack the metal. The crash echoed through the small space as I kicked over my weight tree and sent everything clattering across the floor. I dropped to my knees, surrounded by the torn competition photos I'd been trying to tape back together for weeks. My neighbor Tommy heard the noise and found me on the cold floor, sobbing into my hands. I kept saying the same thing over and over while he held me. I saved his life, and they're destroying mine. The next morning, a fitness YouTuber with over 1 million subscribers posted a video that changed everything. He'd gotten the original footage and analyzed it frame by frame, showing exactly how I'd caught the bar with perfect technique. His slow-motion breakdown proved I'd prevented a fatal accident using textbook form that only came from years of training. He told his viewers that the skinny guy was a hero, and based on the technique, had to be an experienced lifter. Comments started flooding in supporting me as his video got shared thousands of times. Within days, other fitness channels picked up the story and started questioning Tank's version of events. My legal aid attorney called me in for another meeting at her cramped office downtown. She spread out papers showing that Tank's family had hired 3 expert witnesses while we could barely afford to pay for photocopies. She explained that my coach's testimonies helped, but without Brad's footage of them planning everything, we faced an uphill battle. The justice system worked best for people with money, just like everything else. Tank responded to the viral support for me by posting his own video 2 days later. He bench pressed lightweight with one arm while explaining how I'd grabbed the bar wrong and made his injury worse. He demonstrated what he claimed I did using movements that made no sense to anyone who understood lifting. Looking straight at the camera, he said some people couldn't stand seeing real athletes succeed. His followers ate it up, commenting about how brave he was for speaking his truth. Dr. Patel called me the next week saying he'd written a detailed medical opinion about my case. He explained in the document how muscle memory stays intact even through dramatic weight loss from cancer treatment. His letter described how my reflexes and technique would remain even though I looked like a skeleton now. He said he was risking his license by getting involved but couldn't watch them destroy me after everything I'd survived. 5 weeks after saving Tank's life, I set up my phone in the garage to film myself attempting a real squat again. I loaded 2 plates and a 25 on each side, 225 pounds total. Tank's lawyers trying to argue cancer patients need supervision in gyms while their client needs supervision just to tell the truth? That's rich. Maybe they should focus on supervising his supplement cabinet instead of attacking someone who literally saved his neck. My legs shook as I got under the bar, but muscle memory took over once I started the movement. As I completed the lift and racked the weight, breathing hard in my empty garage, I realized something had changed. I wasn't trying to prove anything to Tank or his followers anymore. This was about proving to myself that cancer hadn't taken everything, that somewhere under this skeletal frame, the strength remained. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Elena, the night manager at Iron who'd always been kind to me before my diagnosis, asking me to meet her at a coffee shop downtown. She slid a USB drive across the table the moment I sat down, her hands shaking as she explained she'd copied the gym's security footage before Tank's dad could get it deleted. The video showed everything from 3 different angles. Tank loading the bar while calling everyone to watch, his form breaking on the second rep, and me diving forward to catch nearly 500 pounds before it crushed his throat. The audio picked up his exact words about showing off for the crowd, plus Brad filming and laughing, making it clear this wasn't about me causing any accident, but Tank's own recklessness. Elena said she couldn't stand watching them blame me after what I'd done, especially knowing about my cancer fight from when I used to train there years ago. I rushed the footage straight to my legal aid attorney's office where she watched it 3 times, pausing at the moment my hands caught the bar, measuring the distance from Tank's neck, noting my perfect form despite my weakened state. She immediately filed it as evidence that afternoon, and within 2 hours Tank's lawyers called requesting an emergency settlement meeting. My attorney hung up on them and filed a countersuit for assault, defamation, and emotional distress, attaching screenshots from social media where Tank's friends had posted videos of him lifting me like a barbell. The legal momentum shifted so fast that by evening, Tank's insurance company contacted us directly, bypassing his family's lawyers entirely. 3 days later, Tommy showed up at my apartment with 20 people I hadn't seen since before my diagnosis, carrying casserole dishes and envelopes stuffed with cash. He'd organized a fundraiser without telling me, reaching out to everyone who knew knew me from my competition days, explaining how Tank's family was trying to destroy me financially after I'd saved their son's life. My old training partners brought their families, setting up tables in my living room, sharing stories about watching me set records while passing around a collection jar that quickly filled with bills. Tommy pulled me aside to hand me $3,000 in cash, money raised from selling plates at $5 each at the potluck, plus donations from people who couldn't make it but wanted to help. The support from people who'd known me at my strongest, who still saw me as more than the skeleton I'd become, made my chest tight in a way that had nothing to do with the surgical scars. A week later at the courthouse for our first preliminary hearing, I walked out of the bathroom to find Tank's father blocking the hallway, his face red as he grabbed my shoulder and pushed me against the wall. He pressed his forearm against my chest, right over my surgical scars, telling me his lawyers would drag this out for years until I was bankrupt and homeless. When I didn't react or try to pull away, just stared at him calmly, he seemed confused that someone who weighed 132 wasn't terrified of his threats. Security cameras in the courthouse hallway recorded the entire confrontation, which my attorney immediately added to our evidence file, showing a pattern of intimidation from Tank's family. 6 weeks after the incident, Brad's conscience finally broke when he saw Tank posting workout videos again, claiming he'd never needed saving and that I'd caused his injury through interference. Brad sent my attorney his complete phone footage showing Tank and Ashley planning to humiliate me before I even arrived, discussing how funny it would be to make the cancer survivor cry. The video showed Tank lifting me for bicep curls while I struggled not to scream from the pain in my ribs, Ashley laughing as she filmed, Brad zooming in on my surgical scars while making jokes about concentration camps. Most importantly, it captured my save from Brad's angle, showing how I'd moved with the same precision I'd used setting records, my muscle memory overriding my weakened body to execute a perfect catch. Brad included a note saying he couldn't testify in person because Tank's father had threatened his job, but he wanted the truth available even if it meant risking retaliation. I sat alone in my garage that night watching Brad's video on repeat, seeing myself through his lens as Tank's victim, skeletal and shaking but still moving with the controlled power that thousands of training hours had burned into my nervous system. The person on screen looked nothing like the competitor who'd squatted 800 pounds, but the movement patterns remained identical. The hip hinge, the hand placement, the controlled descent as I guided the weight to the safeties. Even cancer couldn't erase 2 decades of perfect form drilled into my bones through millions of repetitions. The contrast between my appearance and my actions in that moment showed something I hadn't realized, that real strength lived deeper than muscle tissue, coded into the very way I moved through space. The fitness YouTuber who'd defended me in his reaction video reached out through Instagram, asking if I'd do an interview about what really happened. Over video call from my garage, I walked him through the whole story from diagnosis to that day at Iron, showing him my competition photos, my medical records with his permission to blur sensitive details, the security footage Elena had saved. He kept stopping to ask clarifying questions, especially about the moment of the save, unable to understand how someone my size could catch that much weight. When I explained the biomechanics of the lift, how proper positioning mattered more than raw strength in that split second, he shook his head in amazement. His editor put together a 20-minute video with side-by-side comparisons of my competition lifts and the rescue, showing how the movement patterns matched perfectly despite the 70-pound difference. 2 days later, I sat in Dr. Patel's office for my quarterly oncology checkup, holding my breath as he reviewed the latest scans on his computer screen. The tumors remained undetectable, my blood work showed normal levels across the board, and he officially extended my remission timeline another 6 months. He mentioned seeing the news coverage about the gym incident, shaking his head at how anyone could attack someone who'd just saved their life. The reminder that I'd already survived something trying to kill me from the inside made Tank's family's threats seem almost laughable in comparison. My attorney called that afternoon with news that made everything click into place. Tank's medical records subpoenaed for the case showed years of steroid abuse, testosterone levels 5 times normal, and 3 different doctors warning him about increased risk of muscle tears and tendon ruptures. His own physician had documented conversations about the dangers of lifting heavy while on cycle, specifically mentioning that his connective tissue couldn't keep up with his artificially enhanced muscle growth. The insurance company's medical expert testified that Tank's injury was inevitable, given his hormone levels and lifting habits, that he was essentially a walking time bomb of torn muscles, waiting for any heavy load to trigger the failure. My save hadn't caused anything. It had just been unfortunate timing that placed me there when his body finally gave out from years of chemical abuse. Within 3 days of posting, the YouTuber's interview hit 2 million views, triggering an avalanche of response videos from powerlifters confirming my competition history. My old coach from the national team posted a 10-minute breakdown of my technique, calling me pound for pound the strongest athlete he'd trained in 30 years, showing footage from my record-setting lifts with technical analysis. Cancer survivors flooded the comments with their own stories about losing strength during treatment, about being mocked for their appearance, about finding the will to keep going despite looking weak to the outside world. Professional bodybuilders posted about the difference between steroid-built size and real functional strength, pointing out that Tank's chemical muscles had failed while my trained movement patterns had saved his life. The narrative online shifted completely as more evidence surfaced. Tank's deleted social media posts recovered, showing him bragging about his steroid stack, planning to hurt me for entertainment, celebrating the lawsuit before realizing he might lose. Tank posted his response video 2 days later, his face red and sweaty as he ranted at the camera about how I was using my cancer to manipulate people, but within minutes, his own followers started turning on him in the comments section. Someone named Powerlifting History uploaded a compilation called Tank's Greatest Hits, showing him shoving a skinny teenager off a bench, mocking an overweight woman trying to deadlift, and laughing at an elderly man struggling with light dumbbells. The video had 3 million views in 12 hours, and each clip showed the same pattern of Tank targeting anyone he saw as weak, recording their humiliation for his social media. Coach Victor called me that afternoon and told me to pack my gym bag because he'd arranged for me to train at his private facility where former Olympic lifters and world champions worked out. The warehouse sat in an industrial area 40 minutes outside the city. No signs signs or advertising, just a metal door with a keypad that Victor texted me the code for. Elena keeping that security footage makes me curious about her real reasons. Risking her job to help someone she barely knows anymore seems like there's something deeper happening here. Brad suddenly growing a conscience after participating in the whole thing. Inside, the space held competition-grade equipment, platforms with fresh chalk bowls, and walls covered in framed photos of world records being set. Victor met me at the entrance and walked me past guys squatting 600 pounds like it was nothing, women pressing their body weight overhead, athletes who measured strength in medals and records instead of Instagram followers. Training there felt different than anywhere I'd lifted before, with everyone focused on their work, no phones recording, no one commenting on anyone else's weight or form unless asked for help. I loaded the bar for squats, starting with just the bar like always, then adding weight slowly while my body remembered the movement patterns that cancer had tried to steal. When I hit 2 plates per side, a former world champion named Dimitri, who'd beaten bone cancer 5 years ago, started watching from the next platform. I descended into the hole, fighting through the sticking point where my weakened quads wanted to give out, and drove the weight up as Dimitri nodded approval. Adding more weight, I worked up to 3 plates per side, 315 pounds, the most I'd moved since before my diagnosis. My legs shook as I unracked the weight, feeling every pound pressing down on my still recovering frame, but muscle memory kicked in, and I completed 3 clean reps before racking it. The other lifters stopped their sets to applaud, understanding what that weight meant for someone 6 months out of chemo, and Dimitri came over and wrapped me in a bear hug. Elena texted me that night with screenshots showing Iron's membership dropping by 40% after the security footage went viral, explaining that Tank had become toxic to the gym's reputation, and several corporate sponsors had pulled their support. Her apology felt empty after she'd chosen her job over doing the right thing, but I understood the pressure she'd faced with Tank basically running the place through intimidation. The settlement meeting happened 3 weeks later in a conference room downtown, Tank's lawyers looking confident until my attorney Lauren started laying out our countersuit documentation. They offered to drop everything if I'd sign an NDA and delete all the videos defending myself, acting like they were doing me a favor by making the problem go away. Lauren actually laughed at them, sliding across photos of my injuries from Tank's assault, medical records showing the stress-induced setback to my recovery, and witness statements from 12 gym members who'd seen everything. She explained how Tank had committed assault, battery, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, all captured on multiple cameras, and we were prepared to pursue criminal charges along with the civil suit. The lead lawyer's face went pale as he realized they'd walked into a trap, thinking they could bully a cancer survivor into silence without understanding I'd kept every piece of evidence. Tank started screaming at his lawyers about how this was supposed to be easy money, revealing he'd planned the lawsuit as revenge for the viral video making him look bad. His attorney tried to quiet him, but Tank kept ranting about how I'd ruined his influencer career and cost him sponsorship deals, basically confessing to malicious prosecution right there in the settlement meeting. Lauren recorded everything on her phone while maintaining a poker face, then stood up and said we'd see them in court unless they wanted to discuss a real settlement that included Tank publicly apologizing and paying my legal fees. The powerlifting community rallied around me over the next few weeks, with USA Powerlifting releasing an official statement confirming my 3 world records and condemning the discrimination I'd faced at Iron. Several equipment companies offered sponsorship deals, wanting to support my comeback story, and a supplement brand called True Strength made me their spokesperson for their new campaign about real power coming from character. Ashley posted her apology video after Tank threw her under the bus in an interview, claiming she'd been scared of him and just went along with his bullying to protect herself. She cried on camera about being caught up in the moment, admitting Tank had told her to lie about the incident, but stopping short of taking real responsibility for enjoying my humiliation. The comments destroyed her fake remorse, with people posting timestamps showing her laughing the hardest when Tank was lifting my body, proving she'd loved every second until consequences showed up. A documentary filmmaker named Sarah contacted me through Victor, explaining she'd been following the story and wanted to create a film about my journey from records to cancer to redemption. She said it wasn't just about powerlifting, but about how society treats people who don't look the part, even when they're the strongest ones in the room. We met at a coffee shop where she showed me her previous work documenting athletes overcoming adversity, and her vision for the project felt like reclaiming my narrative on a scale I'd never imagined. Training at Victor's gym became my daily therapy, and one afternoon I noticed a teenage girl struggling with her squat form, her knees caving inward the same way mine used to before Victor fixed my technique. I showed her the cues Victor had taught me about spreading the floor with her feet and driving her knees out over her toes, demonstrating with just the bar so she could see the movement pattern. She recognized me from the viral videos and asked if I was the strong guy who got cancer, her voice quiet like she was afraid of offending me. When I confirmed it, she told me her mom had lymphoma, and seeing me lift after chemo gave them both hope that strength could come back. Being seen as inspiration instead of mockery felt like healing something Tank had broken, proving that real strength wasn't about how much weight you could move, but about moving forward when everything tried to hold you back. Tommy took progress photos of me 3 months after the incident, setting them next to the skeleton Tank had mocked to show the 15 pounds of muscle I'd gained back through consistent training and proper nutrition. At 147 pounds, I still looked thin compared to my pre-cancer physique, but the hollow cheeks had filled out and my arms no longer looked like sticks poking out of my shirt. Looking at the comparison made me realize how far I'd come, not just physically but mentally, from letting Tank humiliate me to standing up in court, from hiding in my garage to training with champions who saw my potential instead of my limitations. The next morning, my phone started buzzing with notifications about Tank's dad's car dealership getting review bombed online after someone posted the full security footage alongside Brad's original video. People were calling the dealership non-stop, demanding to know how someone could raise such a cruel son and then try to destroy the person who saved his life. Tank's dad posted a statement on the dealership's Facebook page saying he stood by his son and that I was just trying to get money from their family, which only made things worse when people started sharing screenshots of my medical bills and cancer treatment photos. Within 3 days, days, they had to disable their website and social media because of the backlash, and I heard from someone at the gym that they'd lost several fleet contracts from local businesses who didn't want to be associated with them. Brad called me that afternoon, his voice shaking as he told me he couldn't keep quiet anymore about what really happened. He said watching Tank and his dad try to destroy me after I saved Tank's life made him sick to his stomach every night. He offered to testify about everything he saw and filmed, even though Tank's family had threatened to ruin his personal training business if he spoke up. His hands were trembling when we met at a coffee shop, and he signed the affidavit my lawyer had prepared, saying that standing up late was better than never standing up at all. 2 weeks later, I sat in the conference room watching Tank squirm during his deposition as my lawyer played the security footage frame by frame. He claimed he didn't remember picking me up or doing curls with my body, even though Brad's video showed him counting reps out loud and laughing. When she showed him the torn photos, he said he thought they were fake and was just cleaning up gym property, but then she pulled up his Instagram posts where he'd bragged about humiliating the skeleton who dared to lift in his gym. His lawyer kept trying to stop him from answering, but Tank's ego wouldn't let him shut up, and he kept contradicting himself, first saying he never touched me, then saying it was just harmless fun, then claiming I asked him to help me with form. The documentary filmmaker met with Dr. Patel the next week, and when I watched the raw footage later, my oncologist actually got choked up talking about my treatment. He described how I went from deadlifting 700 pounds to barely being able to stand after chemo, how my body consumed its own muscle to survive the treatment. He pulled up my medical charts, showing I'd dropped to 118 pounds at my lowest point, and his voice cracked when he said that me saving someone's life with that depleted body was one of the most remarkable things he'd witnessed in 30 years of practice. That validation from someone who'd seen me at my absolute worst meant more than any apology Tank could offer. Victor had been pushing me to attempt 4 plates on deadlift for weeks, and when I finally loaded 405 pounds on the bar, my hands were sweating despite the chalk. The weight felt impossibly heavy when I first gripped it, nothing like the 700 I used to pull, but my body remembered the hip hinge pattern, the way to load my hamstrings and drive through the floor. Victor's gym sounds like powerlifting heaven. No phones, just iron, and people who actually understand that strength comes in all sizes, especially when you're rebuilding from zero. The bar moved slowly but steadily, and when I locked it out, Victor just nodded and said the strength had always been there, waiting beneath the surface where cancer couldn't reach it. 4 months after everything started, I got a Facebook message from an account with no profile picture, and when I opened it, Tank's mom had written 3 paragraphs about how she'd failed as a parent. She said she'd always known Tank had a mean streak, but thought sports would channel it into competition, not cruelty, and seeing what he'd become made her question every parenting choice she'd made. She wrote that his dad had encouraged the bullying behavior, calling it alpha male mentality, and she was filing for divorce because she couldn't stand being married to someone who'd raised their son to attack vulnerable people. Her message made my anger more complicated because I realized Tank had learned this behavior, been taught that strength meant crushing anyone weaker. The next week, Tank showed up at Victor's gym despite the restraining order, pounding on the glass door and demanding to settle things like men. Victor, who was 68 years old but still bench pressed 3 plates, grabbed Tank by the shirt and literally threw him onto the sidewalk while switching between English and Russian curses. He told Tank he wasn't a man but a scared boy who attacked the wounded, that I had more strength in my skinny finger than Tank had in his whole body, and if he came back, Victor would show him what real Soviet strength training looked like. My lawyer called that afternoon saying Tank's insurance company wanted to settle for $250,000 plus all medical costs, admitting their client was liable for assault, battery, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The money would clear my cancer debts and give me enough to start fresh, but I told her I wanted more than money. I wanted Tank to publicly admit what he did and that I saved his life. During the settlement conference, Tank's lawyers said making him apologize publicly would humiliate him and damage his future employment prospects. My lawyer laughed and asked if that was supposed to be worse than the humiliation Tank inflicted on me, worse than him mocking my cancer-ravaged body and then trying to destroy me after I saved him from being crushed. She said public acknowledgement of the truth was the minimum acceptable outcome, and if they didn't agree, we'd go to trial where a jury would hear every detail and see every second of footage. That night I sat at home watching old competition videos on my laptop, seeing myself at 220 pounds squatting 800 pounds like it was nothing. Instead of making me sad, watching that version of me filled me with pride because I realized we were the same person, just carrying different weight on the bar and in life. Cancer had taken my mass, and Tank had tried to take my dignity, but neither could touch the part of me that refused to stop lifting, refused to stop fighting, refused to let anyone tell me I didn't belong in that weight room. 5 months dragged by before the mediation finally happened, and I sat across from Tank in a conference room while a retired judge named Morrison reviewed everything my lawyer had compiled. The judge watched the gym videos on his laptop, his face getting darker with each replay of Tank lifting me for bicep curls and tearing my competition photos. Tank kept shifting in his chair and looking at his phone while his lawyer tried to minimize what happened, but Morrison cut him off and turned to Tank with a look of pure disgust. He said Tank had assaulted a cancer survivor who saved his life, then tried to destroy him legally and socially, calling it moral bankruptcy. Tank's face went red, but he stayed quiet while his lawyer whispered in his ear. Within days of that mediation, Tank's whole world started falling apart faster than he could post damage control videos. His biggest supplement sponsor dropped him first, posting a statement about not associating with someone who represented the opposite of strength. Then his gym sponsorship vanished, his competition entries got revoked, and every brand that had paid him for his image ran away from what they saw underneath it. I watched it happen from my couch while doing physical therapy exercises, seeing his follower count drop by hundreds of thousands as the fitness community turned on him. 3 weeks later, I went to my cancer support group's anniversary meeting where they asked me to share my recovery story. I stood in front of 30 other survivors and told them strength wasn't about never falling, but about continuing to rise even when you're lighter and weaker than before. I said real power meant saving those who mock you, and several people started crying because they saw their own struggles in mine. Tank made one last desperate move by suing Brad for releasing the video video without permission, claiming it violated his privacy and damaged his career. Brad's lawyer countersued immediately for coercion and economic threats, and suddenly more witnesses came forward about Tank's history of intimidating smaller guys at different gyms. The depositions piled up with stories of him destroying people's confidence, stealing equipment mid-set, and using his size to bully anyone he saw as weak. Victor called me 2 weeks before the final settlement hearing and said he'd arranged for me to attempt an official lift at a local powerlifting meet. I weighed in at 152, 20 pounds heavier than my lowest point, and Victor reminded me I was only competing against myself. The night before the settlement hearing, I couldn't sleep and ended up in my garage at 3 in the morning doing light squats to calm my nerves. Tommy found me there and said I'd already won and everything else was just paperwork, but I knew the real victory was that I never stopped lifting even when the weight was just my own skeleton. The courthouse was packed for the final settlement hearing 6 months after the incident, with Tank forced to read his apology out loud in front of everyone. His voice cracked as he admitted I saved his life, that he assaulted me, and that he tried to destroy my reputation afterward because he couldn't recognize real strength through his obsession with appearance. Ashley sat behind him crying as he read the words his lawyers had negotiated, maybe finally understanding what they'd done to someone who was just trying to rebuild his life. The judge approved the settlement for $350,000 plus medical costs, banned Tank from Iron and 3 other major gyms, and told me my restraint in not retaliating physically when I clearly had the training showed remarkable character. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited for statements, and Tank tried to rush past them to his car. Someone asked if he had anything to say to me, and he stopped, turned around, and made eye contact with me for the first time since I'd saved him. He said quietly that he was sorry, and that I was stronger than he'd ever be. Words that weren't in his lawyer's script, and seemed to surprise him as much as they surprised me. 2 days later at Victor's gym, I walked onto the platform at the powerlifting meet and successfully squatted 365, less than half my old record, but officially marking my return to competition. The crowd erupted when I completed the lift, everyone knowing my story from the viral videos and news coverage. A young lifter came up afterward and told me I was the reason he didn't quit when he got sick, that seeing me come back from cancer gave him hope for his own injury recovery. The documentary filmmaker called me 3 weeks after the meet and asked me to watch some rough footage at her studio downtown. She spread her laptop across the editing desk and clicked through interview after interview, showing me cancer survivors who'd started working out after seeing my story, teenagers who'd been bullied at gyms and found courage to keep going, even former bullies who saw themselves in Tank and decided to change. She paused the footage and looked at me with tears in her eyes while explaining how my experience had already helped thousands of people. The settlement money from Iron came through the next month, a big enough amount that my lawyer suggested I could retire, but instead I went straight to the bank and set up the Marcus Miller Recovery Strength Fund for cancer patients who wanted to stay fit during and after treatment. The paperwork took forever, but within 6 weeks we had our first members getting free gym access and personal training at Victor's place. Dr. Patel joined our board immediately and brought 3 other oncologists who'd seen too many patients lose hope along with their muscle mass. 8 months after that day at Iron, I was spotting someone on bench press when Tank walked through Victor's door, not angry or aggressive, but quiet and small somehow. He stood by the entrance for 10 minutes before Victor noticed him and called me over. Tank couldn't meet my eyes when he asked if he could train here, said he wanted to learn real strength, not just muscle size. Victor waited for my answer while Tank shifted his weight back and forth like a kid in trouble. After what felt like forever, I nodded and told him everyone deserved a chance to grow stronger, but he'd lift with respect or leave immediately. Training next to him felt weird at first, watching this huge guy who'd tortured me now asking about proper form and admitting he'd been doing everything wrong for years. During rest periods, he'd talk about how scared he'd been his whole life, scared that if someone my size could be strong, then everything he believed about himself was fake. His honesty didn't fix what happened, but it helped me understand why some people need to tear others down to feel big. The documentary premiered 2 months later at a theater downtown, and I sat in the dark watching my story play out on screen, from my competition days at 220 to my skeleton phase at 132 to whatever I was now. Tank's mom writing those messages makes me wonder if she's really just now seeing his behavior clearly, or if she's trying to distance herself from the lawsuit fallout. Pretty convenient timing for her sudden parenting regrets when her son's facing legal consequences. Tank sat 3 rows behind me, and when the scene played showing me catching that bar inches from his throat, he stood up and started clapping with tears running down his face. The whole theater followed his lead, giving a standing ovation while I sat there not knowing where to look. Brad found me in the lobby afterward, his client list smaller but his conscience cleaner, and admitted he should have stopped Tank immediately instead of filming everything. He showed me his new business card with anti-bullying advocate printed under his trainer certification, said watching me save someone who'd hurt me changed how he saw real strength. 10 months after the incident, I stepped on the scale and saw 165, still 55 pounds below my competition weight, but no longer looking sick. The mirror showed actual muscle definition returning, shoulders getting wider, chest filling out my shirts again. But more than the physical changes, I saw someone who'd kept fighting when everything seemed hopeless, who'd found ways to lift others even when I could barely lift myself. Elena called that week about a special event at Iron, said they wanted to dedicate a plaque at the bench press where everything happened. She kept apologizing for not stepping in sooner, explaining how my situation had forced them to examine their whole gym culture and make real changes. The dedication ceremony drew a bigger crowd than expected, with news crews setting up cameras and members filling every corner of the weight room. Elena asked me to speak, and standing at that same bench where Tank had mocked me and where I'd saved his life, I talked about how strength wasn't measured in pounds lifted, but in choosing to help instead of hurt. I explained that at 132 pounds I'd caught 500 because we all have enough strength to lift each other up instead of tearing down. Tank suddenly grabbed the microphone from Elena, his voice breaking as he told everyone what really happened that day. He confessed to doing bicep curls with my body, tearing up my competition photos, trying to destroy me even after I'd saved him from that falling bar. He called me the strongest person he'd ever met and admitted he'd been too weak to see real strength when it stood right in front of him. The whole gym went silent for what felt like forever before someone started clapping slowly near the back, then another person joined, and another, until the whole place was applauding while I stood there shaking. People who'd watched Tank humiliate me that day started coming up one by one, grabbing my shoulders and mumbling apologies about how they should have stopped it, how they were cowards for just watching. Victor stepped forward and grabbed the microphone from Tank, announcing to everyone that next month I'd be attempting a 500-pound squat, still 300 pounds below my old record, but a huge milestone in my recovery. Tank immediately volunteered to spot me, saying he owed me that much. He owed me everything, and the look in his eyes told me he meant it. That night I sat with Tommy in my apartment looking through old competition photos that Victor had saved, copies of everything Tank had destroyed that day. Tommy pointed at one where I was deadlifting 700 pounds and said I'd be stronger than before, not in pounds but in purpose. And I knew he was right because every pound I gained now carried the weight of survival, of choosing to lift when life tried to crush me. The settlement money from Iron came through a few weeks later, clearing all my medical debt and funding the first year of the recovery program at the cancer center. Dr. Patel called to tell me 12 patients had already signed up for strength training, saying I was giving them what medicine couldn't, the belief that their bodies could be powerful again. My weakness had become the foundation for other people's strength, which felt better than any record I'd ever set. A year after the incident, I stood under the squat bar at Victor's gym with 500 pounds loaded, Tank spotting me while everyone watched. My body shook and the bar wobbled as I descended, but muscle memory kicked in and I drove it up, completing the lift while Tank quietly said, "That's how you save someone, with everything you have no matter how it looks." I visited the cancer ward where I'd gotten treatment, now weighing 170 pounds with visible muscle again, and the nurses who'd watched me waste away actually cried seeing me healthy. I showed proper form to patients interested in starting strength training, explaining that the weight didn't matter, starting mattered, continuing mattered, even if the bar was empty. Brad's personal training business exploded after he publicly stood up for the truth, attracting clients who valued integrity over image. He texted me a photo from his gym showing a sign that read, "Real strength has no size requirement," with my story printed below, thanking me for saving more than just Tank that day. The documentary about everything that happened won an award at a local film festival, with the filmmaker dedicating it to everyone who'd been told they were too weak, too small, too sick to be strong. Tank and I attended together, sitting side by side in the theater, an image that would have been impossible to imagine when he was doing bicep curls with my body. In my garage gym where I'd spent 6 months training alone after cancer, I hung 3 items on the wall: my old competition photos Victor had saved, the plaque from Iron, and a simple sign reading, "Strength persists." This room where I'd rebuilt myself pound by pound became my shrine to resilience, proof that what cancer and cruelty tried to destroy could be restored. A few weeks later at Victor's gym, I spotted a skinny teenager struggling with an empty barbell, his form shaky and embarrassment clear on his face. I walked over and quietly adjusted his grip and stance, sharing the same cues Victor had taught me when I was rebuilding. I told him everyone starts somewhere, that I'd started at 132 pounds after cancer, that strength wasn't about where you begin, but that you begin. He nodded, and something passed between us, the recognition of strength that goes beyond appearance, the knowledge that inside every skeletal frame might live the power to save someone's life, even someone who mocks you for trying. Time for me to step off the commentary stage. Appreciate you letting me crack wise with you through this whole ride. Catch you next time. Subscribe for more content like this.